This video will be a follow-up to the previous linear simultaneous equations video. So in this video, we will be focusing on quadratic simultaneous equations, going over what they are, how to solve them, and going over a range of different exam questions. Okay, so starting off, the same thing as the previous video. With simultaneous equations, we are just finding a value for x and y. For quadratic simultaneous equations, it's a slightly different method. And one of the main differences is that for quadratic simultaneous equations, there will be two values for x and two values for y, compared to linear where there's only one of each. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's have a look at this practice question here and see how we can solve this. So the first step, we've got equation 1 and 2, and with quadratic simultaneous equations, usually one of them would be quadratic, so it will have x squared or y squared, something like that. And usually the second equation will be linear. Okay, that's usually the case. So what we need to do here is, because we can't line up both equations and cancel out how we did before, we actually need to substitute this equation into this one and then solve that way. Okay, so to do that, for the linear equation, we need to rearrange it to make either x or y the subject, whatever is easier. And then we substitute that into this quadratic equation. So I'm going to change this equation here from x plus y equals 2 to make y the subject. So y equals 2 minus x. Okay, so now we've got two equations. Y equals 2x squared plus x minus 2 and y equals 2 minus x. So they both equal y. So here we have an equation for y, which is this. So we're going to sub this into the first equation. So 2 minus x equals 2x squared plus x minus 2. Now, in order to solve this equation, we need it to equal 0. So let's take this over to the other side. So we're going to plus x, and we're going to minus 2. Okay, so if you recognize what's going on here, we're getting to the stage where we can factorize this equation and get our two values for x. Okay, so we're going to try and factorize this now as it equals 0. I can see that all of the terms in this equation are divisible by 2. So I'm going to go ahead and divide by 2. Just to make it a bit easier to factorize. So we've got plus 2 minus 1. So now our two values for x are minus 2 and plus 1. Okay, just going to scroll down a bit here. Okay, so now we've got our two values for x. Now we need to get our two values for y. And if you remember from the first step of the question, we actually rearranged this. So to get y, all we need to do is sub in one value for x each time, and then we will get the corresponding value for y. So let's go ahead and do that. So y equals 2 minus x. So y equals 4. And for the second value of x, y equals 2 minus 1. So y equals 1. So if we just neaten that up for our answer, when x equals minus 2, y equals 4, and when x equals 1, y equals 1. So now we have our answers, and the last step here, if you remember in the previous video, what we also did was do a check to make sure that the values for x and y, when subbed into both of the equations, do give us the correct answer. So we're going to do the same thing here. It's a quick 1-minute check. We'll do this on our calculator just to give us confirmation that these values are correct. So we'll start off with this top line here, when x equals -2, y equals 4. So I'm going to sub that into here. So when I sub -2 into this quadratic equation here, I should get 4. And I want to do the same with the bottom equation. So I'm just entering these values into my calculator. Okay, so that checks out. And the second equation is what we actually use to work out our value for y over here. So we know these values work there. 4 plus -2 gives us 2. Okay, so the last one here now, I'm going to sub in x equals 1 into this equation, and that should give me an answer of 1. That's all fine. So we know that this is correct. After doing some practice questions, you will know all of these steps off the top of your head, and you won't really need to keep going back to them. So a high volume of questions is what will give us the highest possibility of success in this topic. And for all of maths topics, to be honest, it's all about taking this theory knowledge here that we learn and applying it to a high volume of exam questions. So over time, we are fully prepared for the actual exam, and we've done enough questions to be in a position where we feel confident in whichever questions do come up. And one thing I just wanted to point out before we move on, with simultaneous equations, 9 out of 10 of the exam questions have this type of format. So if you understand this process, and again, you keep doing exam practice questions, you can easily get full marks for this in the real thing. So we really want to focus on that in our revision. Okay, moving on to some practice questions now. So we've got one equation which is quadratic and the second one which is linear. So the first step is to rearrange this to make either x or y the subject. I think making y the subject would be easier. So 2x minus 7 equals y. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and substitute it into this top quadratic equation. So y equals x squared minus 15, and we have a substitute equation for y, which is this. So therefore 2x minus 7 equals x squared minus 15. Now let's get this equation to equal 0 so we can factorize and solve. Okay. So now let's try and get our two values for x. So two values that multiply to give us 8 and plus or minus to give us 2. I think it will be -4 and +2. So we now have the two values for x. So x equals 4 and x equals -2. So now using our original linear equation, let's work out the values for y. So y equals 2 multiplied by x minus 7. This will give us the two corresponding values for y. So this is 8 minus 7, which is 1, minus 4 minus 7, which is minus 11. So our final answer, when x equals 4, y equals 1, and when x equals minus 2, y equals minus 11. And again, we're going to do our ending checks just to make sure that these values are correct. So I'm going to sub in these values for x and y into this equation here on my calculator. Okay, the first one checks out fine. Okay, and so does the second one. So we know that this is correct. Moving on to the second question now. Just going to move this down a bit. The linear equation already has y as the subject, so we can skip the first step and just go ahead and substitute this in. So whenever we see y, we are going to sub in x. So this equation now becomes x squared plus x equals 12. Now we need this to equal 0 so we can factorize. So this now becomes x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0. Now let's go ahead and factorize this. Two numbers that multiply to give us 12 and plus or minus to give us 1. I think it is plus 4 and minus 3. So the two values for x are going to be minus 4 and 3. Now let's go ahead and work out the two values for y. So y simply is x. So when x is minus 4, y is going to be minus 4. And when x is 3, y is going to be the same, 3. Okay? And just a quick check again in our calculator to make sure this is correct. Most of these quadratic simultaneous equations do come up in calculator papers, but if not, you can still sub them in manually and you will get the same answer. Okay, they all check out, so that's fine. Okay, moving on to another practice question. So let's go ahead and rearrange this equation here. We can make y the subject. That seems like the easiest. So that will be 6 plus 4x. Now let's sub this into the first equation. So y equals 2x squared plus 3x plus 5. And a substitute equation for y is this. So 6 plus 4x equals 2x squared plus 3x plus 5. Now let's go ahead and simplify this. We're going to minus 4x on this side and minus 6. Now let's try and simplify this. So two numbers are multiplied to give us a and two numbers that multiplied to give us c. 2 and 1, 1 and 1, cross multiply. 2 and 1, 2 minus 1. So yeah, this looks like our two brackets. So we got 2x and 1 and 1x and 1. So we're going to minus here and plus in this bracket. So 2x plus 1 equals 0. 2x equals minus 1, x equals minus a half. And for this bracket here, x minus 1 equals 0, therefore x equals 1. So we have our two values for x now. That is the majority of the hard work done in these simultaneous equations. The next bit is pretty simple. As long as we've got this bit right, the next part is just simply subbing this into this simple equation to get a corresponding value for y. Okay, so y equals 6 plus 4 multiplied by x. We'll do that for the second value of x too. So this is 6 minus 2, which is 4. And this is 6 plus 4, which gives us 10. So our final answer will be when x equals minus a half, y equals 4, and when x equals 1, y equals 10. So now let's go ahead and sub these values in to the two equations just to make sure that they are correct. Again, just using my calculator for this. Yep, all of them work, so we know that our answers are now correct. Okay, so handing over to you now. There are 4 practice questions. If you could please pause the video right here and attempt these, and we'll go over them together once you're done. Okay, so let's have a look at the first question. So we can see we've got our quadratic and our linear equation, and our linear equation already has y as the subject, so we can go ahead and substitute this in. So we are going to have 4x plus 15 as y equals 3x squared plus 7x plus 9. So let's simplify this to make this equation equal 0. So 3x squared plus 3x minus 6. Now, as we can see, all of the terms in this equation are divisible by 3. So let's go ahead and simplify this now, just so it's a bit easier to actually factorize. So we're going to have plus 2 and minus 1. So our values for x will be minus 2 and plus 1 here. So now let's work out the corresponding y values. So y equals 4x plus 15. So we're going to have one y value when x equals minus 2, and one y value when x equals 1. So this equals minus 8 plus 15, so equals 7. This equals 4 plus 15, which is 19. So our final answer, just write it together. When x equals minus 2, y equals 7. And when x equals 1, y equals 19. And now lastly for our check, let's go ahead and sub in these values into both equations. Okay, so can confirm this first row is correct. Now just checking the second one. Now just checking the second set of values. And in the exam, once we do these checks now, it saves us a couple of minutes of checking at the end because we know it's correct. Okay, this is fine too. Okay, so hopefully you got those 4 values there. Okay, the second question now. We got our quadratic and our linear equation. Now let's go ahead and rearrange this second equation here, and let's make y the subject. That seems like the easiest one. Okay, so now we are going to sub in this equation for when we see y in this quadratic equation here, equation 1. So x squared plus y, which is 7 minus 2x squared, equals 10. Now remember, when we are squaring a bracket, we need to write out double brackets and not just simply square each term in this bracket here. So let's expand out. Just going to do that on the side here just to make it a bit neater. So 49 minus 14x minus 14x plus 4x squared, and simplified down, that gives us 49 minus 28x plus 4x squared. So let's go ahead and sub that value in here. So x squared plus 49 minus 28x plus 4x squared equals 10. So again, simplify this down. 5x squared minus 28x plus 49 equals 10. Now, last step, let's just take that 10 over. So this equation now equals 0. Okay, so now we've got our equation here. Now we need to try and factorize this to get 2 values for x. So 2 values that multiply to give us 5 and 2 values that multiply to give us 39. I can think of 5 and 1 and 13 and 3. 15, 13. Yep, these can be added together to give us 28. So it looks like these are our 2 brackets right here. So 5x 13, 1x and 3. And we're going to do minus in both brackets. Minus 15x minus 13x gives us minus 28x, and minus and a minus multiplied together gives us a positive. So 5x minus 13 equals 0, x minus 3 equals 0, x equals 13 over 5, and x equals 3. Now let's work out the corresponding y values. So y here equals 9 over 5, and here y equals 1. Okay, so I'm just going to write out the final answer here at the top. So when x is 13 over 5, y equals 9 over 5. And when x is 3, y equals 1. Now again, the last bit for this question, let's just sub in each set of values into both equations to make sure the values match correctly. Okay, the first set matches fine. Now just checking the last set of values. And these work too. Okay, so in the exam that would have gotten us full marks, and we know that because we have done our checks. So it just gives us a bit of reassurance. Okay, so we've got our quadratic and linear equation here for question 3. Y is already the subject, so we can go ahead and sub it into the first equation. So wherever we see y, we are going to write 2x minus 1. And here we have to square that. So again, as we did in the previous question, when we square a bracket, we need to write out double brackets and then cross multiply. I'm going to do that just here on the side. That will give us 4x squared minus 2x minus 2x plus 1, and simplified down, that gives us 4x squared minus 4x plus 1. So let's rewrite this now as 4x squared minus 4x plus 1 equals 4x plus 13. So let's rearrange and simplify this. Let's take all of these over so this equation can equal 0. Okay, so we can go ahead and factorize this, and again what I can see is all of these terms are multiples of 4, so we can go ahead and simplify this just before we factorize to make it a bit easier for us. Two numbers that multiply to give us 3 and add or minus to give us 2. That will be minus 3 plus 1. So our two values for x will be 3 and minus 1. Now let's work out the corresponding values for y. So y equals 2x minus 1. So y equals 2 brackets 3 minus 1 and 2 brackets minus 1 minus 1. Okay, so now I'm going to write our final answer here. So when x equals 3, y equals 5, and when x equals minus 1, y equals minus 3. And just like before, we're going to check each set of values by subbing them into both of these equations to make sure they all match. So just doing that on my calculator. Okay, both sets of values matched correctly, so we know they are right. Okay, so for the last practice question here, and let's rearrange to make x the subject. That seems like that would be the nicer option. Okay, now we are going to sub this into the first equation. So wherever we see x, we are going to sub in 3y minus 6. So y squared equals 2 multiplied by 3y minus 6 plus 7. Expand that out. Now let's take all of these values over, so this equation equals 0. And then we can factorize it. So we're going to have minus 5 and minus 1 in the brackets there, meaning that our values for y will be 5 and 1. Now let's go ahead and find out the values for x. So x equals 3y minus 6. X equals 3 brackets 5 minus 6. And x equals 3 brackets 1 minus 6. Okay, and I'm just going to write the final answer here at the top, so it looks a bit neater. So when x equals 9, y equals 5, and when x equals minus 3, y equals 1. And again, just like before, let's double check these sets of values into both equations to make sure they're correct. Okay, both sets of values work out fine, so that's all done. Hopefully you got all of those correct. If you found any difficulty with them, please rewind the video and go through the steps one by one to see where it was where you got stuck. If you've done that and you're still unsure, please drop a comment below and I will get back to you. Okay, so to end this video, we've got 2 bonus questions here. Now this will be the same as before. We're still going to be substituting this equation into this equation at the top, expanding, simplifying, but the only difference is now the question has asked us to give our answers to 2 decimal places, and that straight away should ring some bells, as that means we can't factorize these equations. So what is the other way that we learned where we could solve for x or y? We're going to have to use the quadratic equation. Okay, so keeping that in mind, please pause the video and attempt both of these questions here, and we'll go through this step by step once you're finished. Okay, so let's go through the first one. So same as all of the other questions, we've got our linear equation with y as the subject, so we're going to go ahead and substitute that into the first equation. So that will give us 5x minus 3 equals 3x squared plus 6x minus 7. Now we can take over these terms, so this equation equals 0. Okay, so this is our simplified equation. Now just a quick pointer here. Now as the question has already stated, we need to give our answer to 2 decimal places, so we know that we need to use the quadratic equation to actually solve for x, and that factorization here wouldn't work. Okay, so a quick reminder, the quadratic equation is x equals minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So let's go ahead and write out our values for a, b, and c in this equation. So a equals 3, b equals 1, and c equals minus 4. So to solve for x, we need to work out minus 1 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, which is 6. Now, as this is a quadratic, we need to have 2 values for it. So the way we are going to do that is we are going to write out 2 equations into our calculator, one with a plus sign and one with a minus. So I'm just going to write out both of the equations separately. So minus 1 plus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times 3 times minus 4 all over 6. And then the same thing, just with a minus instead of a plus. So let's go ahead and write out the first equation into our calculator, exactly as shown on screen. Okay, so the first value for x is actually 1, and the second value of x, we don't need to do the equation again on our calculator, we just need to change the plus sign to a minus and then press equals. And the second value for x is minus 4 over 3, which is minus 1.33 to 2 dp. I've kept this value here as a fraction because it will be better to use this when we're doing our checks instead of using a rounded figure for x. Now that's our 2 values for x done. Now let's work out the 2 values for y. So y equals 5x minus 3. And even to work out the value of y, this value as a fraction is easier to use, and then we round for our final answer. So y equals 5 multiplied by 1 minus 3, and y equals 5 multiplied by minus 4 over 3 minus 3. So y equals 2, and y equals minus 29 over 3, which when rounded to 2 dp is minus 9.67. Okay, so I'm just going to write the final answers here, just on the side. So when x is 1, y is 2, and when x is okay, there we go. Now we're just going to sub in these values into both equations, and remember, when doing this on your calculator, please use the fraction and not the rounded number. just so our checks are more accurate. Okay, both sets of values are correct. So you can see it's very similar to all of the other questions that we've done, but the only difference is instead of factorizing to get values for x, we had to use the quadratic formula, and some of our answers will be decimals. They won't all be whole numbers, which is the reason for doing this. Now, moving on to the final question. Now let's go through this just like the previous question. So our second equation already has y as the subject, so we can go ahead and sub that in to our first equation. So x squared plus 3x plus 5 squared equals 4. And again, we're going to write out double brackets, then expand and simplify. Just going to do it here on the side. That will give us 9x squared plus 15x plus 15x plus 25. Simplified, that leaves us with 9x squared plus 30x plus 25. So let's go ahead and substitute that into the equation. And we'll just collect the like terms. Now last step, let's take this 4 over, so this whole equation equals 0. Now I'm just going to write out the quadratic equation again here. So let's apply this now to this equation here. A equals 10, B equals 30, and C equals 21. Just going to rub this out for now. So x equals minus b plus or minus b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a, which is 20. Now remember, to get our two values for x, we need to write one equation with a plus, then change that plus to a minus to get the second value of x. So let's enter these values into our calculator. So the first value of x rounded to 2dp is minus 1.11. And one thing that I'm going to do here, just to make it easier for when it comes to working out y and actually doing our checks, is I'm going to write out the fraction equivalent, and that is what we will use in the next equations, as it is better to use the full number compared to a rounded one. Okay, it gives us more accurate results. So the fraction equivalent here is minus 15 plus root 15 over 10. And the second value of x rounded to 2dp is minus 1.89. And again, the fraction equivalent okay, so now let's work out the value for y. So 3 multiplied by minus 1.11, so the full number, plus 5. Same for the second value. So in the calculator, I'm going to use these corresponding values, the fraction equivalents, okay, as they are the full numbers. So we have minus 0.66 to 2dp, and the fraction equivalent for this and the second value for y rounded to 2dp is 1.66. And again, just going to write out the fraction equivalent. Once we've done our checks and we've confirmed that these are all correct, we won't need these anymore. So these are our values for x and y. Now the last part of this question, we just need to double check that these are correct. It's been a bit of a long-winded question compared to the others due to the actual quadratic equation and so many decimals being present. But once this check comes out as fine, we just need these decimal numbers as our final answer. Okay, so I'm just going to sub in the corresponding fractions into both of these equations to make sure that they are all correct. As if we were just to use these rounded numbers, it wouldn't give us an as accurate answer compared to using the full number here. And unfortunately, it's just a bit of a manual procedure that we need to do for all of these numbers. Okay, so the first two values check out fine. Now just to check the second set of values. Okay, and they check out fine too. So these are our final answers for x and y. And that is the end of the video. I hope you found this useful in how to work out quadratic simultaneous equations with the use of factorization and the quadratic formula as well, if we need to give our answers to 2 decimal places or 3 significant figures. If you found any of these questions difficult, please go over them or drop a comment below and I will be sure to help. And I'll see you on the next one.